Okay, we are on page 247 or 246, chapter 48 on the tale of a rat. Woo, we're going to finish this book in this video. All right, buckle up. Here we go. Have you ever had hold of the tail of a rat? At best, it is an unpleasant sensation, scaly and cold, similar to holding on to a small, narrow snake. At worst, when you are dependent upon a rat for your survival, and when a part of you is certain that you are being led nowhere except for your death, it is a hideous sensation, indeed, to have nothing but a rat's tail to cling to. Nonetheless, Despereaux held on to Botticelli Remorso, and that rat led him deeper and deeper into the dungeon. Despereaux's eyes had by this point adjusted quite well to the darkness, though it would have been better if they had not, for the things he saw made him shiver and shake. What did he see? He saw that the floor of the dungeon was littered with tufts of fur, knots of red thread, and the skeletons of mice everywhere. There were tiny white bones glowing in the darkness, and he saw in the dungeon tunnels through which Botticelli led him, the bones of human beings too, grinning skulls and delicate finger bones rising up from out of the darkness and pointing toward some truth best left unspoken. Despereaux closed his eyes, but it didn't help. He saw as if his eyes were still open, wide, the bones, the tufts of hair, the knots of thread, the despair. Ha ha, exactly! Botticelli laughed and negotiated the twists and turns. Oh, yes, exactly. If what was in front of Despereaux was too horrible to contemplate, what followed behind him was perhaps even worse. Rats. A happy, hungry, vengeful parade of rats, their noses up in the air, sniffing, sniffing. Mouse, sang out one rat joyfully. Yes, oh yes, mouse, agreed another, but something else too. Soup, called out another rat. Yes, soup, the others agreed. Blood, sang a rat. Blood, they all sang together. And then they sang, Here, mousie, 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 here, little mousie. Botticelli called out to the other rats. Mine, he said. This little treasure is all mine, gentlemen and ladies. Please, I beg of you, do not infringe on my discovery. Mr. Remorso, said Despereaux. He turned and looked behind him and saw the rats, their red eyes, and their smiling mouths. He closed his eyes again. He kept them closed. Mr. Remorso, he shouted. Yes, said Botticelli. Mr. Remorso, said Despereaux, and he was crying now. He couldn't help it. Please, the princess. Tears, shouted the rats. We smell tears, Mousie, we do. Please, shouted Despereaux. Little friend, said Botticelli, little Despereaux Tilling, I promise you, and I will keep that promise. The rat stopped. Look ahead of you, he said. What do you see? Despereaux opened his eyes. Light, he said. Exactly, said Botticelli. Light. Chapter 49. What do you want, Miggery Sow? Again, reader, we must go backwards before we must go forward. We must consider for a moment what had occurred with the rat and the servant girl, and the princess down in the dungeon before Despereaux made his way to them. What happened was this. Rescuro led the Pea and Mig deep into the dungeon to a hidden chamber, and there he directed Mig to put the princess in chains. Gore, said Mig, she's going to have a hard time learning her lessons if she's all chained up like... Do as I say, said Rescuro. Maybe, said Mig. Before I lock her up, her and me could switch outfits, so we could start in already with her being me and me being a princess. Oh, yes, said Rescuro. Certainly. A wonderful idea. Miss Miggery, princess, take off your crown and give it to the servant girl. The Pea sighed and took off her crown and handed it to Mig. Mig put it on, and it slid immediately tight down her small head and came to a rest, quite painfully, on her poor abused ears. It's a biggish thing, she said, and painful like. Well, well, said Rescuro. How do I look? Mig asked, smiling at him. Ridiculous, he said. Laughable. Mig stood, blinking back tears. You mean I don't look like a princess? She said to the rat. I mean, said Rescuro, you will never look like a princess, no matter how big a crown you put on your tiny head. You look exactly like the fool you are and always will be. Now, make yourself useful and chain the princess up. Dress-up time is over. Mig sniffed and wiped at her eyes, and then bent to look at the pile of chains and locks on the floor. And now, princess, I am afraid that the time for your truth has arrived. I will now tell you that what your future holds, as you consign me to darkness, so I consign you, too, to a life spent in this dungeon. Mig looked up. Means she going upstairs to be a serving maid? No, said Rescuro. Ain't I going to be a princess then? No, said Rescuro, but I want to be a princess. No one, said Rescuro, cares what you want. As you know, reader, Miggery Sow had heard this sentiment expressed many times in her short life, but now, in the dungeon, it hit her full force. The rat was right. No one cared what she wanted. No one ever cared. And perhaps, worst of all, no one ever would care. I want, cried Mig. Shh, said the princess. Shut up, said the rat. I want, sobbed Meg. I want. What do you want, Mig? The princess said softly. Eh? Shouted Mig. What do you want, Miggery Sow? Princess shouted. Don't ask her that, said Rescuro. Shut up, shut up. But it was too late. The words had been said. The question at last had been asked. The word stopped spinning, and all the creation held its breath, waiting to hear what it was that Miggery Sow wanted. I want, said Mig. Yes, shouted the Pea. I want my ma, cried Mig into the silent, waiting world. I want my ma. Oh, said the princess. She held out her hand to Mig. Mig took hold of it. I want my mother too, said the princess softly. And she squeezed Mig's hand. Stop it, shouted Rescuro. Chain her up, chain her up. Gore, said Mig. I ain't going to do it. You can't make me do it. I got the knife, don't I? She took the knife and held it up. If you have any sense at all, said Rescuro, and I heartily doubt that you do, you will not use the instrument on me. Without me, you will never find your way out of the dungeon, and you will starve to death here, or worse. Gore, said Mig. Then lead us out now, or I will chop you up into little rat bits. No, said Rescuro. The princess shall stay here in the darkness, and you, Mig, will stay with her. But I want to go upstairs, said Mig. I'm afraid that we're stuck here, Mig, shouted the princess, unless that rat has a change of heart and decides to lead us out. There will be no changes of heart, said Rescuro. None. Gore, said Mig. She lowered the knife. And so the rat and the princess and the servant girl sat together in the dungeon as, outside the castle, the sun rose and moved through the sky and sank to the earth again, and night fell. We sat together until the candle had burned out and another one had to be lit. They sat together in the dungeon. They sat and sat. And reader, truthfully, they might be sitting there still if a mouse had not arrived. Chapter 35. Princess! Despereaux shouted. Princess, I have come to save you! Princess P heard her name. She looked up. Despereaux, she whispered. And then she shouted at Despereaux! Reader, nothing is sweeter in the sad world than the sound of someone you love calling your name. Nothing. For Despereaux, the sound was worth everything. His lost tail, his trip to the dungeon and back out of it, and back again, back into it again. He ran toward the princess, but Rescuro, baring his teeth, blocked the mouse's way. The princess cried, Oh no, rat, please, don't hurt him. He's my friend. Mig said, Don't worry, princess. I will save the Misi. She took the kitchen knife. She aimed to cut off the rat's head, but she missed her mark. Whoopsie, said Miggery Sow. Ow! Screamed Rescuro. He turned to look at where his tail had been, and as he did, Despereaux drew his needle and placed the sharp tip of it right where the rat's heart should be. Don't move, said Despereaux. I will kill you. Ha ha ha, Botticelli laughed from the sidelines. Exactly. He slapped his tail on the floor in approval. Absolutely. Delightful. A mouse is going to kill a rat? Oh, all of this is much better than I anticipated. I love it when mice come to the dungeon. Let me see, said the other rats, pushing and shoving. Stand back, Botticelli told them, still laughing. Let the mouse do his work. Despereaux held the trembling needle against Rescuro's heart. The mouse knew that as a knight, it was his duty to protect the princess. But would killing the rat really make the darkness go away? Despereaux bowed his head over so slightly, and as he did so, whiskers brushed against the rat's nose. Rescuro sniffled. What is that smell? He asked. Mousy blood, shouted another rat. Blood and bones, shouted another. You're smelling tears, said Botticelli. Tears and thwarted love. Exactly, said Rescuro, and yet there's something else. He sniffed again. and the smell of soup crashed through his soul like a great wave, bringing with it the memory of light, the chandelier, the music, the laughter, everything, all the things that were not, would never, could never be available to him as a rat. Soup, moaned Rescuro, and he began to cry. Boo! Shouted Bonicelli. Hissed the other rats. Kill me, said Rescuro. He fell down before Despereaux. It will never work. All I wanted was some light. That is why I brought the princess here. Really, just for some beauty, some light of my own. Please, shouted Bonicelli, do kill him. He is a miserable excuse for a rat. No, Despereaux, said the princess. Don't kill him. Despereaux lowered his needle. He turned and looked at the pea. Boo! Shouted Bonicelli again. Kill him! Kill him! All this goodness is making me sick. I've lost my appetite. Gore! Shouted Mig, waving her knife. I'll kill him. No, wait, said the princess. Rescuro. She said to the rat. What? He said. Tears were falling out of his eyes and creeping down his whiskers and dripping onto the dungeon floor. And then the princess took a deep breath and put a hand on her heart. I think, reader, that she was feeling the same thing that Despereaux had felt when he was faced with his father begging him for forgiveness. That is, he was aware suddenly of how fragile her heart was, how much darkness was inside it, frightening always with the light. She did not like the rat. She would never like the rat, but she knew what she must do to save her own heart. And so, here are the words that the princess spoke to her enemy. She said, Rescuro, would you like some soup? The rat sniffled. Don't torment me, he said. I promise you, said the princess, that if you lead us out of here, I will get cook to make you some soup, and you can eat it in the banquet hall. Speaking of eating, shouted one of the rats, give us the mousey. Yeah, shouted another, hand over the mouse. Who would want to hurt him now? Said Botticelli. The flavor of him will be ruined. All that forgiveness and goodness? Bleh. I, for one, am leaving. Soup in the banquet hall? Rescuer asked the princess. Yes, said the pea. Really? Truly, I promise. Gore, shouted Mig. Soup is illegal. But soup is good, said Despereaux. Yes, said the pea, isn't it? The princess bent down before the mouse. You are my knight, she said to him, with a shining needle, and I am so glad that you found me. Let's go upstairs. Let's eat some soup. And reader, they did. Chapter 52, Happily Ever After. But the question you want answered, I know, is did they live happily ever after? Yes and no. What of Rescuro? Did he live happily ever after? Well, the Princess Pea gave him free access to the upstairs of the castle, and he was allowed to go back and forth from the darkness of the dungeon to the light of the upstairs. But alas, he never really belonged in either place. The sad fate, I am afraid, of those whose hearts break and then mend in crooked ways. But the rat, in seeking forgiveness, did manage to shed some small light, some happiness into another life. How? Rescuro, reader, told the princess about the prisoner who had once owned a red tablecloth, and the princess saw to it that the prisoner was released. And Rescuro led the man up out of the dungeon and to his daughter, Miggery Sow. Mig, as you might have guessed, did not get to be a princess, but her father, to atone for what he had done, treated her like one for the rest of his days. And what of Despereaux? Did he live happily ever after? Well, he did not marry the princess, if that is what you mean by happily ever after. Even in a world as strange as this one, a mouse and a princess cannot marry. But, reader, they can be friends. And they were together. They had many adventures. Those adventures, however, are another story. And this story, I'm afraid, must now draw to a close. But before you read, reader, imagine this. Imagine an adoring king and a glowing princess, a servant girl with a crown on her head, and a rat with a spoon on his, all gathered around a table in a banquet hall. In the middle of the table, there is a great kettle of soup. Sitting in the place of honor, right next to the princess, is a very small mouse with big ears. And peeking out from behind a dusty velvet curtain, looking in amazement at the scene before them, are four other mice. Mon Dieu, look, look, says Antoinette. He lives, he lives. And he seems such the happy mouse. Forgiven, whispers Lester. Cripes, said Furlough. Unbelievable. Just so, says the Threadmaster Hovis, smiling. Just so. And reader, it is just so, isn't it? The end. Wow. What an extraordinary book. I want you to sit back and reflect. What are some of your favorite parts of the book? And then I want you to maybe predict what, if there was another book made after this one, what would happen? All right. Thank you for listening. Bye. Goodbye.